All right, we begin with the Dallas Cowboys, but first a Twitter question. Keith, what do you have for us?
Yes, McCall Boleen wants to know how much you think the injuries up front could impact the Cowboys' offense.
All right, well, it's a good question because it leads us right into the news we mentioned a little bit earlier, which is Travis Frederick, who by many people's accounts is the best, if not one of the two best centers in the NFL. He does everything well for the Cowboys. Stephania, he was diagnosed yesterday with, I'm just going to tee it up to you because I fear butchering both the pronunciation and also what it means.
It's unusual. So it's Guillain-Barré. Yep. If you see the word hyphenated there, Guillain-Barré. And as Travis noted in his post, he posted about this. If you want to look him up on Twitter, he stated in his post that it's an autoimmune disease. Body basically begins to attack the peripheral nerves. Think of that as the nerves that go out to your arms and your legs. And the tough part about this is we don't know exactly what causes it. It's not particularly common, but it's common enough that, medical folks are familiar with it. And it has a range of presentations, and that's what also makes it very unusual and sort of tricky to deal with. It can be things that are relatively mild, usually starts with like numbness and tingling sensation, often in like the hands or the legs and the feet. And it can progress to more intense sensory loss or motor weakness. And in some cases, it can almost completely paralyze you. In other cases, you will have relatively minor presentation of those signs and symptoms, and then you recover. Now, he has notably already begun treatment for this, but he also said the doctors cannot indicate a timetable for him, and that's very true. Like I said, this could range from something that is a few weeks to some people have permanent symptoms of residual weakness that they never quite recover from. The hope is that since he was diagnosed relatively early, he also said his doctors had told him that the hope is that he makes a complete recovery. That's number one. Yep. As far as when he's able to return to football, he expressed a desire to return to football. We just can't say at this time. I will say this, that people who have weighed in with sympathy for Travis Frederick, other people who they talk about, even after feeling like they've returned, there's still this sense of weakness that can take quite some time to get over. So we don't know when he'll be back. We wish him a speedy and full recovery. That's the number one priority. But he's hopeful to eventually play again. But I would say right now, the Cowboys have to assume that they will need to make another plan potentially for the entire season.
Worth noting that Marcus Martin, backup offensive lineman for the Dallas Cowboys, also has been banged up. Is he out for I think he might be out for the year right now. So they've got quite a bit of, I would say, and of course Zach Martin, their standout guard,
right,
is sketchy for the season opener right now with the knee injury. So this is a banged up offensive line, Mike. At one point, this was the signature position group on this team. Knowing what we do about this Cowboys offensive line, and to the original Twitter question, how much concern for you is there over the offensive line and what it means for Ezekiel Elliott, Dak Prescott, most specifically those two players?
Yeah, and you say it's the signature position on that team. I mean, I remember back two off seasons ago, that was like the signature position
in the NFL.
Of the NFL. That's all everybody talked about was how great that line was. So I'm with you. I definitely have concerns here now. Granted, stick with me here. It's kind of a small sample, but you look back at last season, just when Tyron Smith was out, how it changed that offense. I mean, Zeke Elliott wasn't affected massively, dropped from 4.1 to 3.9 yards per carry, fine. But you look at Dak Prescott without his left tackle, I mean, just it's unbelievable, the difference. Again, 1 touchdown, 5 interceptions in those 4 games without Smith. He had 21 touchdowns and 8 picks. Yards per attempt dropped from 7.2 to 5.4. Fantasy points per game, which is what we care about here, drops from 19.3 per game to 7.5. That's just a massive drop, and that's just without the left tackle. So
I remember last year on Sunday's Field, you may remember this too, we would talk about Dak Prescott as a play and whether it was worth starting him or not because Tyron Smith was out. Like it was a game changer, literally, with all the stats you have to back it up.
Absolutely, and if you look at efficiency stats for quarterbacks, I mean, a clean pocket versus not having a clean pocket is like going from Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady to I don't want to throw anybody under the bus, but basically like a backup quarterback. I mean, it's just a
you had
massive
a chance. You could have thrown him under the bus, Mike. Wouldn't have bothered us.
Well, I would go Matt Stafford, but I'm not that rude.
How dare you, Mike Clay?
I was going to say, you might not be back tomorrow if you say Matthew Stafford. All right, so let's get to Dak then, noting what Mike just did about the offensive line play and what we laid out there in terms of offensive line injuries. I continue to have him at 11 in my quarterback rankings. His ADP is 14. Mike, you have him at 18. Right now, he's being drafted in under 50% of leagues. Here's the good, and I'll lay this out for you. 3 touchdown passes or a rushing touchdown in 56.3% of his games. All right, over the past 2 seasons, Tom Brady and Russell Wilson can say the same thing about 42.9 and 40.6% of their games. Now, I get it. Tom Brady is not nearly the rushing threat that Dak Prescott is. So in some ways, that stat is a little bit, it's sort of tailor-made for a player of Dak's ability. At the same time, he is in the same breadth of Tom Brady from a QBR standpoint. Another stat that does heavily weigh rushing and scrambling ability, but he's second to only Tom Brady in terms of QBR over the past 2 seasons. And the reasons why I'm less concerned about the pass catcher group that so many others are is that this was not like Dak Prescott was playing with a superstar group of pass catchers over either of the past 2 seasons, especially last year. I think this group has a chance to be slightly inferior, but just slightly inferior to what it was last year. Those are all the pluses of Dak Prescott, which is why I still have enough faith in him that he's a borderline starter for me in a 10-team league. Mike, you feel differently.
Yeah, it's a tough call here. There's really a lot to unpack. I mean, he was 6th place as a rookie, performed well behind that offensive line we just talked about. Last season, though, it's like, which was the real Dak Prescott? You look at the beginning of the season, 7 top 12 fantasy weeks in his first 8 games. And then when the Zeke suspension started, you started to have the injuries with Tyron Smith as well. He'll need one finish better than 16th the rest of the season. If you told me he was going to finish 4th this season, I would not be surprised. My issue with him is that it's going to be a low-volume passing game, most likely. I have them projected 32nd in dropbacks. They want to lean on the run as often as they possibly can. I think we'll see how the offensive line plays out, but they're probably a 7-8 win team, so they should be mostly competitive. And here's the key. You have so many options at quarterback. It's like if you move him up 10 spots, you have to move everybody else down, and there's just so many great options. That top 20, I'll say from 8 to 20 is almost the same at the quarterback position.
I guess that's probably what the argument against taking Dak. There are 2 arguments. If you're nervous, there's so many other options that I'm not going to begrudge you if you tell me, hey, listen, I'd rather Matthew Stafford, I'd rather Phillip Rivers, I'd rather Matt Ryan. I'm fine with that. I put him in a tier. I have long said, and I will continue to say this until I'm done working. Fantasy football rankings.
It's a long time you got ahead of you.
Yeah, only 60 years ahead. But tiers make more sense in rankings than 1 versus 2 versus 2 versus 3, 7 versus 8. Dak Prescott's not a clear-cut starter to me. He's a player that I think has the ability to finish as a top 10 quarterback, which applies to about, 6 others as well that are outside my top 10. Zeke Elliott might be, though, the one Cowboy amongst all others that you can, he's the only Cowboy that everybody 100% trusts. I think, Mike, that most people view Zeke Elliott is on the outside looking in on that number 1 overall conversation. But can you make the case for Zeke Elliott to go number 1 overall?
I think in non-PPR you can. I think in PPR it's harder to do because, though, they're going to throw him the football more often this season, and we did see an uptick last year. I believe it was about a target per game last year. It may go up even further this year. That's great. But will he get to Bell? Will he get to Gurley? Will he get to David Johnson in terms of usage? I don't think he's going to get that far. So non-PPR, you can make the case. I don't think you can in PPR.
Those 4 are so unique in so many ways, Stephania. But one of the things about Zeke Elliott that you probably only appreciate when you spend time around him is he's a fire hydrant. This dude is built to last. He missed 6 games last year, but he's stout.
Yeah.
Yes, injuries can happen to anybody in any moment, but players that are equipped to handle a large workload, Zeke fits the bill.
He totally does. He's built, to me, David Johnson kind of built the same way. Le'Veon Bell, more of a stout running back. And the thing with Zeke is the only injury that I recall him having was the hamstring issue in the preseason. Yep. So there was a lot of chatter. I think it was ahead of last year. The camps run together for me. But I remember going out, everybody was like, is he going to be ready? Is he going to be ready? And he was ready from a health perspective. It just ultimately, the time that he missed was due to a suspension. So he keeps himself in good shape. The volume is not a surprise. Yeah. It's not going to surprise him to have that much work.
I think his passing game usage goes up this year as well. And we saw a steady growth, as Mike mentioned and Stephania echoed, we saw it last year go up. He averaged 17.7 routes run per game in 2016 as a rookie. It goes up to 26.5 as a sophomore last year. I think he's got a legit shot to lead the NFL in total touches this year. Him or Le'Veon Bell. Le'Veon obviously is the clear-cut favorite, but Zeke could very well lead the NFL in touches this season.
And I do have him projected leading in carries and yardage. So I'm with you. Carries and rushing yards.
And I think we all believe, many of us believe he's got a great shot to lead. You mentioned him as number one player in non-PPR.
Touchdowns. Yeah.
Touchdowns.
That's the thing where I think that if I was making the case, that would be it, because they're going to go to him, and he's got the potential to get in, even if you know that that's what they're going to do.
Moving on to the pass catchers, and I'm not really sure where to start because no one knows where to start with the Dallas Cowboys pass catchers. It almost feels like we need a poll put up about which Cowboys pass catcher you most want to roster in 2018. Let's just begin with the more familiar names, because none of them are particularly familiar. But Allen Hurns was acquired this offseason after he was released by the Jaguars. 2 years for about $12 million, I want to say, for Allen Hurns. From the U. So, Stefan, you're right back into your wheelhouse. Do you feel as though Allen Hurns is the Cowboys wide receiver you most want to roster?
I haven't seen it yet. I love the guy. I think he's got the potential, but the most exciting receiver is the one named Gallup to me so far. Now, that could change. I feel like the preseason sample size is always hard to judge. I don't think Hurns really thrived in Jacksonville the way that he could if he hooks up with Dak. Obviously the passing game left something to be desired in Jacksonville. But there's a note from Kyle here, wide receiver 18 finish in 2015. And I think that the possibility is there, but I think it's too early. I think the preseason, I haven't seen enough out of him for me to be super confident.
Okay, so haven't seen enough out of him to be super confident. Mike, do you have a Cowboys pass catcher that you're most interested by?
Well, I have Hurns ranked highest. I have him right around 50, so he would be the first guy I'd take if they were all on the board and I was ready to take a Cowboys wide receiver. I think Gallup's the better value. You can get him about 4 or 5 rounds later. Massive upside at 100 catches last season. Actually, his efficiency took a dive last year, and he still got 100 passes at Colorado State. I think he's an excellent prospect, so I like him a lot in the late rounds. As for Hurns, I'm intrigued by him because, again, we've seen it at times with Jacksonville in a not very good offense. We've seen him perform in fantasy, and he's very versatile, which is very attractive. I mean, he's 6'3". He can play outside. He spent a lot of time in the slot. So we'll see kind of who loses out in that battle that's going on there in Dallas, but he could play inside and out, and that could generate a lot of targets for him.
Here's the hard part for me with the Cowboys pass catchers. Michael Gallup, Allen Hurns, Terrence Williams, Cole Beasley.
Right.
I have a much easier time talking myself out of any one of them emerging as the number one player in this passing offense than I do talking myself into any of them becoming a number one target that you can count on week by week, if that makes sense.
I hear you. I could see that upside for Gallup, though. I could see him just blowing up week 1, catching 2 touchdowns and going nuts.
But he feels like that big play guy, you know? And I think that's, if Dak's in trouble and he's got to throw the ball deep to get out of trouble, Gallup, to me, is the one who's going to be there. And those will be those big fantasy days. I think Hurns could be a volume guy, especially like the short. I think he could replace what Cole Beasley has done for them at times.
So maybe what it comes down to is when you're drafting one of these players, it's looking at your roster and what you need. If you're looking, hey, listen, end of the bench, upside play stash, Michael Gallup's your guy. If you're looking for a player that might be able to fill in for you during the bye week, maybe you lean toward Allen Hurns, for example.
By the way, just remember, everybody complained about how inefficient Des Bryant was last season. He was wide receiver 24. He got enough volume.
Sure.
There's volume to go around. Almost 50% of the receiving yards are gone from Jason Witten and Des Bryant. There's certainly somebody has to catch
That's the other thing. There's no more Jason Witten to catch those passes.